What if the most powerful muscle car General Motors ever built came out the exact same year the company quietly started planning to kill the entire category? In 1970, Chevrolet dropped a 454 cubic inch big block into the Chevelle and rated it at 450 horsepower, a number so high it beat the fabled 426 Hemi on paper, and a number almost nobody in Detroit actually believed was the whole truth. Dyno operators, drag racers, and mechanics have spent 5 decades insisting the real output was closer to 500 horsepower. This is the story of the LS6 Chevelle, the car that represented the absolute peak of the muscle car era, arriving at the exact moment the forces that would end that era were already closing in. To understand why 1970 became the ceiling for muscle car horsepower, you have to understand what had been holding Chevrolet back for years before that. General Motors had maintained an internal corporate policy restricting how much engine displacement could go into its mid-size cars, a rule meant to keep the horsepower wars and the insurance premiums that came with them from spiraling further out of control. Pontiac had already found a workaround with the GTO's Ram Air engines, chipping away at the policy from the edges. But it wasn't until 1970 that GM finally lifted the displacement cap across the board, clearing the way for Chevrolet to do something engineers had reportedly been pushing for internally for years: take their big block 454 and drop it straight into the Chevelle for the first time. Chevrolet actually offered that 454 for 1970, and the gap between them tells you everything about how far the top-tier engine pushed things. The LS5 came rated at 360 horsepower, built for buyers who wanted serious torque without the compromises of a race-oriented engine underneath them every day. The LS6, by contrast, was a different animal entirely. It ran an 11.25-to-1 compression ratio that demanded premium high-octane fuel, solid lifters, a forged steel crankshaft, forged aluminum pistons, big rectangular port cylinder heads, and a 4-bolt main block engineered to survive the internal pressures the engine was capable of generating. Feeding all of it was a massive 800 CFM Holley 4-barrel carburetor. On paper, Chevrolet rated the finished package at 450 horsepower and 500 pound-feet of torque. For one stretch of automotive history, that made the Chevelle the only car in GM's entire lineup to carry a higher official horsepower rating than the Corvette itself. Ordering one wasn't simple, and it wasn't cheap. The LS6 engine option alone added roughly $260 on top of the Chevelle's base price. But Chevrolet wouldn't sell it to you unless you also checked the box for the Z15 SS454 package, which added another $500 by itself. Add the mandatory heavy-duty 4-speed manual transmission most serious buyers wanted paired with it, and the total premium climbed toward $1,000 over a base Chevelle that started at well under $3,000, nearly a 30% jump in price just to unlock the engine bay's full potential. All told, a properly optioned LS6 Chevelle pushed toward $5,000 out the door, squarely into Corvette territory for a mid-size family car wearing a Supersport badge. What buyers got for that money was, by nearly every period account, one of the most brutally fast production cars America had ever built. Independent magazine testing throughout late 1969 and early 1970 consistently suggested the factory's 450 horsepower figure was conservative, with real-world dyno pulls and drag strip performance implying an engine closer to 500 horsepower in as-built tune. Contemporary comparisons placed the LS6 Chevelle among the very fastest quarter-mile cars of the entire muscle car era, trading blows directly with rivals like the Plymouth Roadrunner and the Dodge 426 Hemi cars that had defined straight-line performance for years. For a brief moment in 1970, if you wanted the single most powerful engine General Motors would sell you in anything short of a Corvette, the LS6 Chevelle SS454 LS6 was it.
But the same corporate anxieties that had kept the displacement cap in place for years hadn't disappeared just because GM finally lifted it. They'd simply been outpaced briefly by engineers who'd been pushing for this exact car. GM's dominant market share throughout the 1960s had executives genuinely worried about the possibility of a government-mandated breakup, a fear that had already influenced the company to downplay racing and outright performance marketing internally for years. The LS6 Chevelle wasn't born from a company eager to advertise the fastest car in America. It was born from engineers who'd finally gotten the corporate green light right as the broader institutional appetite for that kind of car was already starting to sour.
That timing turned out to be almost cruelly precise. Insurance companies, watching accident and theft statistics climb across the entire muscle car segment, were already raising premiums aggressively on high-horsepower cars by 1970, making something like the LS6 punishingly expensive to actually insure for the young buyers most likely to want one. At the same time, federal emissions regulations were tightening fast, and every engineer in Detroit knew high-compression solid-lifter monsters like the LS6 were living on borrowed time. The LS6 wasn't just the peak of the muscle car era by coincidence. It arrived at that peak because the walls were already closing in from every direction at once, and 1970 was essentially the last year Detroit could build something this uncompromising and still call it a production car.
The production numbers reflect exactly how narrow that window really was. Chevrolet built only 4,475 LS6-equipped vehicles for the entire 1970 model year, a figure that includes both Chevelles and El Caminos combined, out of roughly 600,000 Chevelles built that year overall. Within that already tiny number, LS6 convertibles were rarer still. Fewer than 200 were built with that combination, making a documented numbers-matching LS6 convertible one of the single rarest configurations in the entire muscle car era. The window for buying the most powerful engine GM had ever offered outside a Corvette was, in hindsight, barely open at all.
It didn't stay open long. Rising insurance rates and tightening emissions requirements combined to kill high-output big blocks across the entire industry within just a couple of years, and the LS6 option itself was gone from the Chevelle lineup after that single 1970 model year, never offered again. The broader muscle car era that had defined the previous decade contracted rapidly right behind it as manufacturer after manufacturer detuned or discontinued their most extreme engines under the same mounting pressure. The LS6 Chevelle wasn't just a high point, it turned out to be very close to the actual finish line for the entire genre of car it represented.
Decades later, that brief, narrow window is exactly what makes the LS6 Chevelle one of the most sought-after muscle cars in existence. Documented, numbers-matching examples now regularly command prices well into six figures at major auctions, with the rarest convertible variants pushing past $1 million for the right buyer. Collectors aren't just chasing horsepower figures anymore. They're chasing a car that represents the precise, unrepeatable moment when Detroit's internal restraints briefly lifted just long enough to let engineers build the most powerful thing they possibly could, right before the entire industry was forced to pull back for good.
The Chevelle SS454 LS6 was never built to last, in more ways than one. It existed because a corporate policy finally lifted after years of internal pressure, because engineers pushed the resulting engine as far as it could physically go, and because for one single model year, nobody had yet forced Chevrolet to hold back. That's the real story here, not just a powerful car, but the exact high watermark of an era that was already ending as this car rolled off the line. If you want more stories about the machines that represented the absolute peak of what Detroit could build before the walls closed in, stick around, hit subscribe, and let's dig into the next one together.